The LMGs just received a pretty decent buff to their out of cover damage, down from 15% up to 22%. The Lone Star 6-piece got an even bigger buff to its RPM and weapon damage bonuses, down from 20% up to 30%. And then the M4 assault rifle has also received a very tiny but still a very realistic nerf to its base damage. So, has there ever been a better time to swap over to LMGs? I don't really think so, guys, unless you're counting patch 1.4 and you're only counting the Hungry Hawk, since back then the Hungry Hawk had a much higher base damage than all the other LMGs and had a better accuracy as well. But aside from that one outlier in that one patch that only lasted 3 weeks anyway, no, LMGs have never been this strong, and neither has Lone Star. So with patch 1.8 dropping, it is finally time to start messing around with the classified Lone Star. And the first thing that I came up with is this MG5 crit build that is going to be especially strong in PvP, both on PC and on console due to the heavy reliance on base damage buffs and critical hits, which means that you don't necessarily have to land headshots to mow people down. This is going to be a build where the LMGs are going to have 38% critical hit chance and 116% critical hit damage natively. That is without a pulse or without any buffs up. The only thing is with this build, and I'll say this before we start, is that this build requires a group to play with, because it needs a healer to keep itself alive. Yes, it has a crazy amount of damage, but it also has very, very poor self-sustain. So no, this is not a solo build. If you end up by yourself one way or another, well, you're pretty much dead. So make sure that that doesn't happen. But yeah, with that out of the way, shall we begin? Just to catch up, if you don't really know what the classified Lone Star does yet, here's a quick rundown. The 2-piece gives the player 100% ammo capacity, the 3-piece gives you 8% shotgun damage and 8% LMG damage, and then the 4-piece will reload your weapon for you every time that you swap it. So going from your primary weapon to your secondary weapon on an empty magazine will automatically refill it for you, and then when you swap back, it's refilled. It's that simple. The 5-piece is also pretty strong because it adds another 15% ammo capacity, 12% shotgun damage and 12% LMG damage. And then the 6-piece is quite a paragraph to read, but it actually works in a pretty simple way. Once you're halfway through your magazine, you have a 75% chance to get the Lone Star buff under your health bar. And if you get this buff, the game will automatically refill your magazine for you when you fire the last bullet of your magazine, so you can keep firing on, so to speak. In addition to that, it also gives that extra magazine 30% extra bullet damage and 30% increased rate of fire. So your DPS with that second magazine is going to be increased by over 60% pretty much. Now the cool thing about this buff is that it can proc multiple times in a row, so you can chain 2, 3 and sometimes even 4 magazines in a row, all with this Lone Star buff, which turns a 50 bullet magazine into a 150 bullet magazine, shooting with 30% more damage and 30% higher rate of fire. On the build, I pushed most of the main stats into firearms, quite far actually, over 8,000, and then I rolled the rest into stamina until I just had underneath 5,000. The way that I set this up is that I have one of the pieces rolled into stamina, in this case the knee pads, and then also 3 out of the 5 gear mods into stamina. Now the reason that we want to spec into stamina with this build is because with patch 1.8, stamina got buffed back up to 30 health per stamina point, down from 15. So yeah, I know, in patch 1.7 we usually wouldn't take any stamina whatsoever, but in patch 1.8, stamina is actually pretty good, especially because the developers also increased the PvP damage modifier a bit, so that increase in toughness that you got from the 3000 baseline stamina that everybody has by default, it kind of gets mitigated a bit by the increased PvP damage modifier. I'll have a whole separate video on stamina and time to kill coming very soon, because there are still some things that I want to say about that. But for now, for this video, just take my advice, go with 5000 stamina and then either add or take away stamina from that, depending on how safe or how risky you want to play. Less stamina means that you will have more firearms or more electronics, and that means that you're going to be more effective. You're going to deal more damage or have more healing, but it also means that you're easier to take out because you don't have that much health. With 5000 stamina, I would say that this build is already a bit on the squishy side, so I wouldn't go below that. I would actually even recommend some of the newer players to replace the 2 firearms mods on this build with stamina mods as well, just so that you're a little bit tankier. You're going to give up on some DPS, but at least you're not going to die as quick. And also, remember, we are a DPS player, but we're also Lone Star with this build. We have LMGs, we have big magazines. If we can't use those because we have to duck back into cover after taking 2 or 3 shots, well, that's also not going to be an ideal scenario. I found that around 5000 stamina works for me. I can keep myself alive, but I also have a very good healer to keep me topped off. So if you feel like you're dying too fast, maybe spec a bit more into stamina. Now, of course, I'm also going to talk about all the stat rolls on my gear soon, but first I wanted to talk about the weapons, because I'm using two identical MG5s that both have the same talents and the same weapon mods. This is because I'm using the Lone Star, and the Lone Star 4-piece allows me to reload my weapon when I swap it, so that turns a 5-second reload into a 1-second weapon swap. And if I just have two of the same weapons, I can just swap back and forth between my primary and secondary weapon, acting as if it's only one weapon, but then basically skipping the reload and being able to shoot much more often. The scope that I have on these weapons has critical hit damage as the bigger roll, and then critical hit chance and headshot damage. The muzzle is exactly the same, critical hit damage as the big roll, and then critical hit chance and headshot damage. I also have critical hit damage on the grip, and then ideally you would want to get accuracy and optimal range as the smaller rolls. But I actually have a very special case because I have some legacy level 32 grips from patch 1.2, and with the scaling system that Massive implemented in patch 1.4, something went wrong. I don't know, for some reason these grips scaled up to 20% critical hit damage, and that is 1 or 2% higher than what is currently possible to get in the game with level 34 mods. So I'm just gonna use these level 32 20% critical hit damage mods, but of course, if you don't have them, you can't get them. So what you want to aim for is these critical hit damage mods with accuracy and optimal range. And then for the magazine, we're using a rate of fire magazine with, again, critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Under normal circumstances, I would never use a rate of fire magazine over an extended magazine. But in the case of Lone Star, and with the MG5, my base magazine size is already sitting at 50. And, of course, with this build, I'm going to want to proc my 6-piece bonus as often as possible. Otherwise, I'm not going to get that 30% bonus damage and the 30% rate of fire on the second magazine. And if I have a very large magazine, because I went with extended magazine size, then it's going to take a long time for me to get that buff. It means I wouldn't get it as often, and it means that I wouldn't get as much value out of my build. So in this case, I'm actually going for a rate of fire magazine, which not only gives me the most burst damage, but it will also allow me to go through the magazine a lot faster, and this allowing me to get that Lone Star buff more often. And if I don't get it, well, it's not a problem, because we still have the Lone Star 4-piece. We can just swap our weapons, skip the 5-second reload, and then try again. As for the talents on our weapons, we're going to take Vicious, Deadly, and Accurate. Vicious is great, even though we don't have any sustain with this build, because this is basically a DPS build with everything else spec'd into stamina, so it's kinda hard to keep yourself at high health, but this build is also meant to be played within a team setting, where you're always going to have a healer, and when you're topped off, this talent gives you straight up 10% critical hit chance, which is really strong, especially on a build that focuses on crit. Then we have 15% critical hit damage from Deadly. Well, can't really argue with that either. However, the last talent, Accurate, that might come as a surprise to you, because it definitely came as a surprise to me. I never really felt that accuracy did anything for me on my assault rifles. I just didn't notice it that much. Maybe it is because I used the M4 and the M4 was already pretty accurate, but I gotta say, on the MG5, having Accurate as a talent is an absolute must-have. Especially because you cannot get responsive anyway, which is the talent that I would have gotten otherwise. But you cannot get responsive on LMG, so, you know, there's that. But here, take a look at this side-by-side comparison. With on the left side, we have the MG5 without Accurate, and on the right side, we have an MG5 with Accurate. I'm just gonna move here from left to the right, and you can see the difference is insane. And it's not just the Accurate weapon talent that has this much of an effect on the MG5, it is the accuracy stat in itself. Which technically means that you could also get weapon mods with accuracy, but that wouldn't be smart, because accuracy mods only give you 15% more accuracy, and you're of course forced to give up that 18% critical hit damage. It's better to just turn it around to get the 18% critical hit damage on the scope or on the muzzle, and then get not 15, but 25% accuracy with the accuracy weapon talent. But now I think it's time that we also look at the gear pieces and the stat rolls, because that's also a big part of the build. On the chest piece, I have exotic damage resilience, health and ammo capacity. Health and ammo capacity I think are pretty straightforward, but then I went with exotic damage resilience and not skill haste to protect myself a little bit from the Predator's Mark bleed damage and the grenade damage from all the grenades. But also because with this build I am basically pretending that skills don't exist. I don't even run my own first aid anymore, which is for multiple reasons actually. Not just because I already have a healer in the squad, but we'll get to that part later when I talk about the skills. On the mask I've got crit chance and burn resistance, again pushing more and more into crit. And then on the knee pads I have health, shock resistance, disrupt resistance and burn resistance. Pretty much your textbook PvP knee pads right there. Backpack, also nothing special. I've got health, burn resistance, and then on the gloves, as you probably expected as well, LMG damage, critical hit chance, and critical hit damage. The holster also has critical hit chance, and then on all 5 of my gear mods, I have 1% critical hit chance on them as well. And when I put all of that together, the weapon mods, the weapon talents, the gear stat rolls, all those things, it gives my character a native critical hit chance of about 38%, and a native critical hit damage of about 116% if you don't have that special level 32 grip. And also, you know, not that important for consoles, but still pretty relevant for PC players, we're also sitting close to a headshot damage of 100% because of the high headshot damage amount that the MG5 naturally comes with. The performance mods that I have are all 2% pulse critical hit chance mods. I know that the skill power that I have on this build is super shitty, but the pulse duration actually does not scale with skill power, so it's always going to be 20 seconds of concealment. And in some cases, you know, not a whole lot, but in some cases, it is going to give me 15% extra critical hit chance if other players are not running a concealed pulse of themselves as well. And then for my second skill, as I said, I'm not running with a first aid, but instead I'm running with the immunizer. And again, there are a couple of reasons for this. With the first one being is that if I put the support station on the floor and then instantly blow it up, it will always give me 33% of my health back. Which in this case is way more than the first aid would give me. Not only because I'm not running with any skill power, but also because the stamina to health scaling amount got buffed. So every player is running around with a lot more health, which also means it's harder to heal all of that health back up. Unless the healing is percentage based, just as with the support station master mod. There's also another reason that I'm running with the support station though, and this one is maybe even more important, and that is that you cannot shoot your weapon and heal yourself back up with the first aid at the same time anymore in patch 1.8. So as a DPS player, to stop shooting and then heal yourself back up for a very laughable amount, because I have no skill power as I just said, it's just not going to be practical. It's not going to help you win that DPS trade. But you can still put the support station on the ground, then start shooting, and then while shooting you can blow it up to receive that 33% burst heal. And of course it also removes the status effects if you run an immunizer. You get put on fire, you just drop the box down. And it also has a much larger radius than the first aid, and it can also overheal if you want to pop it earlier in a fight. So yeah, it seems that for a DPS player, the immunizer seems like an easy choice for now. This is finally going to be a patch where not everybody is going to run with the first aid. I don't think we've ever had that before in the lifetime of the Division. Now the talents that I have are Critical Save, Combat Medic, On the Move, and Precision. Combat Medic is obvious because we're playing with a team and Combat Medic is just too strong within the team, especially now with the better stamina scaling. 40% of your health is still going to be 40%. And then Critical Save and On the Move are still really good to have in PvP as well. Now why Precision? Well, what a lot of people do not know about Precision is that it also gives critical hit chance and critical hit damage to the user and pretty much to anybody else shooting the pulsed target. It gives you 12.5% crit chance and 25% crit damage to be exact. These used to be the base values for the pulse skill as well back when the game just came out. But in the meantime, they've reworked the pulse to be quite low when you have no skill power, but on the other hand, this talent has still been unchanged since launch. And 12.5% crit chance and 25% critical hit damage on a crit-orientated build is pretty insane, to be honest. Of course, it requires you to land a headshot, but with all the bullets you'll be spraying at the enemies, at least one of those is surely going to be a headshot, even on consoles. And if not, it's no big deal either. It is just a nice bonus if it happens. The very last thing that I added to this build is a lower gear score sawed-off shotgun that I crafted with one of those lower level blueprints. When I got the shotgun, I just made sure that I had the terminal on it so that when I use my signature skill in PvP, I can just pull up this shotgun and kill some red bars or purples with it to get my signature skill back faster. But yeah, that is going to be the whole build. And in my honest opinion, this is easily one of the strongest PvP builds out there this patch. It just gives you so much unconditional damage. As I said, we have the 22% out of cover damage. We have the 12% LMG damage on the gloves, 8% damage on the 3-piece, 12% damage on the 5-piece, another 30% damage and 30% RPM on the 6-piece. 11% more RPM from the rate of fire mech, and then because we spec'd into crit, we have 38% critical hit chance. And 115% critical hit damage on top of an MG5 that has over 8,000 firearms stacked. For this build, you don't need striker stacks, you don't need headshots, you don't need to sit in cover to get the damage. You don't need to wait for someone to throw a grenade your way before you get the damage buff. You don't really need to be up close, although you can be if you really want to. Basically, all you have to do is hold down the fire button and people will start to drop down. The only thing is that you're going to need a healer to keep yourself back up. This is not really a solo build. It's just meant for raw DPS when you're playing in a group setting. Just as always, I've got the complete overview of the build right here on this image. You can just screenshot this or download the screenshot from the link in the description box down below, so you can always find it somewhere without having to come back to the video over and over and over again. And of course, if you have any questions left, well, you know where to find me. As always, I will see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.